Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to examine a highly provocative, and I mean a deeply aggressive piece of writing that takes direct aim at modern spirituality.
Oh, absolutely. Aggressive is the right word.
Right. It completely tears down this concept of, comfortable faith. We are looking at a whole stack of sources today, articles, video scripts, some text overlays, that just systematically deconstruct the idea of a casual religious life.
Yeah, they really do not hold back.
They don't. But before we get any further, I want to make something crystal clear to you, the listener. The text we are unpacking today contains some very intense, highly opinionated religious arguments.
Very intense.
Yeah. And we are diving into this purely as an analytical exercise. I mean, neither of us is taking a side here, and we are absolutely not endorsing these viewpoints. Our goal is just to, unpack the rhetorical arguments, the analogies, and the really stark claims in this material to just understand the author's perspective on passive faith.
That disclaimer is crucial, I think, because the whole architecture of this argument is, well, it's intentionally hostile. Yeah.
It is designed to provoke discomfort. The author is really not interested in making the reader feel validated at all.
And that tension is really what brings us to the hook of today's deep dive. Because I want you to imagine finding out that simply, not being a bad person isn't just insufficient, but it actually makes you worse than a full-blown villain.
Which is wild to think about.
It is, but that is the central, shocking premise we are unpacking today. According to this text, being a decent, sort of detached person is considered a far greater spiritual offense than being an active, outright rebel.
Because it's a complete inversion of basic human morality, right? I mean, we intuitively operate on this spectrum like a moral thermometer.
Like a thermometer.
Yeah. On one extreme, you have the saints, giving away everything they own. On the other extreme, you have the villains actively causing harm. So we naturally assume that hovering somewhere in the middle, like paying your taxes, holding the door for people, just avoiding major crimes, that puts you in the safe zone. Doing a little bit of good is always better than doing bad.
Right.
That's what we all think.
Exactly. But this text argues that half-heartedness is actually the ultimate spiritual failure.
Right. And to understand why it claims that being decent is somehow worse than being rebellious, we really have to look at the foundation of the argument, because the entire critique is built upon a very specific ancient piece of scripture.
Yeah, the book of Revelation.
Specifically, chapter 3, verses 15 and 16.
Hmm.
In it, the divine says, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth.
And the author of our source text refuses to just, quote that verse and move on. They drill down into the linguistics to really heighten the aggression of that passage.
Oh, they definitely do.
They point out that the original Greek word that gets translated as spit you out literally translates to vomit.
Wow.
Yeah. They frame lukewarm faith as a spiritual emetic. And an emetic is, it's a substance specifically designed to induce vomiting. Right. So the argument is that passive faith literally makes the creator physically sick.
Wait, let me just stop you there for a second. God vomiting. I mean, that borders on sacrilegious to a lot of traditional believers, doesn't it? Is the author doing this just for, pure shock value? Or is there a deeper rhetorical reason they won't let go of this specific grotesque word?
Well, they are mapping a physiological gag reflex onto a spiritual concept to basically destroy any sense of comfort the reader might have. The revulsion has to be physical for the metaphor to work the way they want it to.
Okay, let's unpack this. Or, actually, no ellipses. Let's unpack this, because that is an incredibly visceral image. Let's make it relatable.
Sure.
Think about taking a massive gulp from a mug. If you're expecting piping hot coffee, the heat wakes you up. It serves a very distinct purpose, right?
Right.
On the flip side, if you're expecting ice-cold water after, running outside on a blazing summer day, the freezing temperature shocks your system in a refreshing, necessary way. Both extremes are useful.
They both trigger a positive bodily response.
Exactly. Both extremes are useful. But imagine you pick up that cup, expecting one of those extremes. Instead, you get this stagnant, room temperature, completely neutral liquid. Your body's instinctive reaction is to reject it. you gag. You just want to spit it out.
Because you immediately reject it because it feels unnatural. And the text uses this vomit factor to illustrate that neutrality is totally unnatural in the context of devotion.
Yeah.
But the intellectual core of the argument is really about why the divine would prefer the extreme of cold, which in this text represents outright rebellion or non-belief over that middle ground.
And that is the part that is so jarring to me. I mean, in this framework, cold means you are essentially an enemy of the faith. Why on earth is being a total rebel somehow better than being comfortable and generally nice?
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism the author applies to this ancient text, because the argument hinges entirely on self-awareness and honesty.
Okay, how so?
Well, a cold person like the outright rebel, they're intellectually honest about where they stand. They know they are on the outside. They know they don't have the fire, and they aren't pretending to.
Right.
A hot person is obviously entirely consumed by the fire, but the lukewarm person, the text argues that the lukewarm person is completely delusional.
Delusional because they think their nice guy routine is actually devotion.
Exactly. They've completely anesthetized themselves. Because they aren't that bad, or because they, show up occasionally and do the bare minimum, they genuinely believe they have achieved safety.
Wow. So they think they're good.
Right. The author is saying that a rebel can be reached because the rebel knows they are rebelling. The comfortable person is unreachable because they've convinced themselves they are already righteous.
So the danger isn't just laziness then. The real danger is the self-deception that the middle ground breeds. I mean, the text actually calls this middle ground a grave.
The grave.
It's a place where urgency goes to die because you don't even realize you were flatlining.
And the author doesn't just leave this in the realm of ancient theology either. They aggressively pull it forward into modern everyday life to prove their point.
Yeah, focusing on what they call the insult of average.
Exactly. They ask you to take this concept of being lukewarm and apply it to your most important earthly commitments.
And the analogies they use here are just brutal. I mean, the source asks you to imagine looking at your spouse, the person you committed your whole life to, and telling them, honey, I'm feeling pretty lukewarm about you lately.
It's awful.
It is a massive insult. It is a relationship-ending statement. Or, imagine sitting down for a performance review with your boss and saying, yeah, I'm lukewarm about my job.
You are fired on the spot.
Literally fired.
Yeah.
And the author aggressively questions why we ruthlessly reject half-heartedness in our marriages or our careers, but somehow we assume the creator of the universe is perfectly fine being treated as a side hobby, or, as the text puts it, a social club membership.
It really highlights a bizarre cognitive dissonance. Like, why does human psychology tolerate half-heartedness in abstract spiritual concepts, but ruthlessly reject it in interpersonal relationships? Nobody wants to be a side hobby to someone they love.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting. I actually want to push back on those analogies.
Oh, go for it.
Because as rhetorically powerful as they are, there is a fundamental tension in the text's own logic here. I mean, jobs and club memberships are inherently transactional.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Right. I do the work, my boss paid me the money, I pay my dues, the club lets me use the golf course. It's a strictly performance-based exchange. Even a marriage, well, obviously rooted in love, requires a reciprocal, continuous exchange of tangible effort to function.
Yeah, that's true.
But this text also explicitly argues that faith is entirely non-transactional. Later in the document, it literally says there is no subscription plan for heaven. It heavily implies you cannot buy your way in with good deeds.
So you're pointing out that the author is demanding absolute measurable extremity while also claiming the system itself isn't a transaction.
Yes.
Yes.
How can you demand the exact same all-or-nothing performance we give to our earthly bosses while simultaneously insisting that faith cannot be earned? Isn't that a massive contradiction?
It is a very sharp observation. But the text attempts to resolve this friction through a concept it calls passive rebellion.
Passive rebellion.
Right. The author argues that in the realm of faith, neutrality is an illusion. You cannot simply opt out of the intensity because doing nothing is still an active choice.
So passive rebellion means inaction is an action.
Think about the cognitive dissonance required to live in the middle. The source insists that sitting in a pew, nodding your head to the music, and then living worldly, which is their term for living exactly like everyone else the rest of the week, is not harmless neutrality.
It's a performance.
Exactly. It is a performance. The author frames this comfortable existence as a slow-motion rejection of the divine. In their eyes, you aren't avoiding a transaction. You are actively betraying a relationship by pretending to be in it while withholding your actual devotion.
A slow motion rejection. Wow. That paints a really chilling picture of someone slowly letting go of a rope while like smiling and pretending they're holding on tight.
That's a great visual.
You play the nice guy. To preserve your social standing and avoid the guilt of a definitive break, all while quietly withdrawing your loyalty.
And that is the exact psychology the author is attacking. They argue that preserving your social standing while claiming to hold revolutionary beliefs makes you a hypocrite of the highest order.
So if this self-deception is so obvious, if being lukewarm is, as they say, spiritually sickening and passive rebellion is a betrayal, who is letting all these people get away with it?
That is the big question.
And that question points straight to the author's most brutal critique: the institution itself.
The author totally pivots from critiquing the individual psychology to launching an all-out assault on the modern church institution. They believe the organized structure is entirely complicit.
Complicit feels almost too mild for what is in these sources, honestly.
Right.
I mean, the material includes a script for a short video, one of those fast-paced, high-intensity social media clips designed for maximum engagement.
Right, the TikTok-style videos.
Yeah. And the script relies heavily on calling out pastors and church leadership directly. It claims that your pastor won't actually have this aggressive conversation with you about being lukewarm. And why? Because according to the text, 90% of the congregation, and crucially 90% of the church's budget, comes from lukewarm people who just want to feel good on a Sunday morning.
It is a devastating economic critique of modern spirituality.
It really is.
The video script prompts are incredibly pointed. One line literally says, "You're playing Christian on Sunday and playing worldly on Monday." It calls the comfortable believer a spiritual double agent.
A spiritual double agent. Let's really dig into the mechanics of how a church becomes complicit in this, because it reminds me of a dynamic you see all the time in modern consumer culture, specifically in the tech world.
Oh, like with software.
Yeah, think about a company that offers a freemium product. You have a basic app that is totally free to use, but with limited features. The company creates this comfortable, easy, free version of their product because they need massive user numbers. They have to show investors that millions of people are engaged.
But the infrastructure required to support those massive numbers ends up changing the company's priorities.
Exactly. In the process of catering to the masses with this free, easy version, they end up completely abandoning the hardcore, dedicated users who wanted the original, complex product in the first place.
Cool model shit.
Right. The company's entire financial survival becomes dependent on the casual users. And I want you, the listener, to consider how natural this is for any large organization. Institutions, by their very nature of needing to survive, pay the rent, and keep the lights on, they naturally bend toward the comfort of the majority.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, think about the mechanics of a budget. If 90% of your funding comes from people who just want a nice, uplifting Sunday aesthetic, a pastor subconsciously alters their message.
Of course they do.
They soften the edges of the theology because if they demand absolute extremity, the funding literally walks out the door. The author is mapping basic behavioral economics onto spiritual survival. If we connect this to the bigger picture, your freemium analogy perfectly captures what the author calls the discipline of extremity.
So the church has essentially become a freemium product.
They are offering a low-cost, low-commitment version of faith just to keep the subscriber numbers high. But the source material insists that the divine does not offer a freemium model. God demands the whole heart or nothing at all. Yeah, and the video script hits its climax with this really stark claim. Your church loves your lukewarm faith because it keeps the lights on, but God hates it because it keeps your soul dead.
Man, that is heavy. I mean, it's asking individuals to reject the very culture of the institution they are a part of, while supposedly adhering to the religion that institution represents.
It's a huge ask.
It is a demand for radical authenticity over institutional survival.
And the author doesn't leave any room for negotiation or reform either. They demand that believers practice the discipline of extremity, basically choosing a side, hot or cold, and staying there completely regardless of the social cost or the institutional pressure to just blend in.
Which brings us to the final, uncompromising ultimatum that this text presents to its audience. To really understand the sheer force of this conclusion, we have to look at the text overlays the author designed for their social media graphics.
Yeah, the visual prompts.
Right. The source material includes this list of prompts meant to be slapped over videos in big, bold letters. And these are clearly designed to disrupt your scroll and force a crisis of conscience.
The phrasing is aggressive by design. We are talking about text prompts like, God prefers the cold over the comfortable, and the middle ground is spiritual vomit.
They also throw in things like, you're nice guy, faith is an insult to the cross, and pick a side or be rejected. I mean, the tone is entirely confrontational.
It leaves zero wiggle room.
None. The ultimate takeaway of the document is summarizing that if your faith doesn't cost you anything, it is worth exactly what you paid for it, which is nothing.
Zero.
The text demands that people stop trying to play both sides, stop trying to keep one foot in the kingdom and one foot in the world.
And the author distills all of this into one devastating sentence. At least the cold person is honest. The lukewarm person is just a liar who likes the music.
A liar who likes the music. I mean, that really encapsulates the critique of the Sunday morning performance, doesn't it?
It really does.
You get to enjoy the aesthetic of spirituality, the community, the emotional high of the songs, without submitting to any of the actual demands of the belief system.
It is the ultimate spiritual double agent.
So what does this all mean? When you take a step back from the aggressive rhetoric, the vomit analogies, and the provocative social media scripts, the synthesized message of this text is remarkably clear.
Yeah, it cuts right through the noise.
It is a relentless demand for absolute honesty over a comfortable, half-hearted performance. It is an argument that true devotion just cannot coexist with a desire to, fit in and be considered a nice, average person.
It challenges you to look in the mirror and ask if you are actually on fire, or if you are just pretending to be warm because you happen to be standing near the heater.
That's a great way to put it, standing near the heater. It is a very challenging standard. And the text makes it painfully obvious that very few are actually meeting it.
And this raises an important question, and it's something for you to mull over as you think about how human groups actually function. Because we talked earlier about the author's claim that churches rely on lukewarm budgets just to keep the lights on.
Right, the 90% rule, the whole freemium model.
Exactly. If human institutions, whether they're churches or political movements or even social causes, if they naturally require a critical mass of comfortable, average people just to fund the operation and keep the doors open, is it even possible to build a mainstream, organized community around this discipline of extremity? Or is it an unavoidable reality that any fiery extreme movement will eventually have to cool down to lukewarm simply to survive the practical economic realities of being an institution in the real world?
That is the ultimate paradox. The very institutions built to spread the fire might be the exact things watering it down over time.
It's a structural inevitability.
It really makes you rethink the moral thermometer we started with today. Suddenly, that comfortable middle ground doesn't look like a safe harbor anymore. I mean, depending on how you look at it, it might just be a glass of stagnant room temperature water.
And we know what happens when you drink that.
Yeah. It makes you want to spit it out.
Thank you for tuning in to the Inbox of Grace. Remember to like and follow.